Good afternoon and welcome to the docSHARE 2023 webinar series. From February to March, we have a curated lineup of talks with local industry experts speaking on a variety of topics pertaining to documentary craft and what goes into the pre and post-production of executing your film. docSHARE is an initiative of the Documentary Filmmakers Association of South Africa to create opportunities for experienced film professionals to share their knowledge and engage with the work and concerns of the DFA's existing and prospective members. The program also offers a support network to 10 Tier 3 filmmakers who want to apply for their first NFVF developmental funding, where they access the docSHARE public sessions in addition to bespoke mentorship. This session is open to the public and we really appreciate your attendance. Please note the docSHARE program is powered by the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program, PESP3, which is administered by the NFVF. And thank you so much to the NFVF for this opportunity. Today, we welcome Jessie Zinn, who will be speaking about budgeting for short documentaries. The talk will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A starting at 15:45, so please start thinking about questions. And a little bit about this topic. This session uses Jessie's latest short documentary, Faces of Fortune, as a case study of a film supported by the NFVF for their Unsung Community Heroes Slate, with a detailed step-by-step overview from the proposal and pitching to completion of the final film. This will include the principles for drafting a budget for a short documentary that aligns with the needs of the creative proposal. It will also address what you can expect from a funder and what they will require in return. Thank you so much, Jessie. Please could you briefly introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your professional background, and then please dive into the topic.
Sure, thank you so much for having me. Also, Neo's profile picture is beautiful. I'd love to see a face if there is one behind the picture. It's just like a very smiley photo. Anyway, hello everyone. Hello. For those of you who weren't part of the meeting now, I'm Jessie and I'm a filmmaker. I am originally from Cape Town, but I'm now based in Johannesburg, where there is a heat wave and I am absolutely schwitzing right now. And there's also load shedding, so I'm in a house that is not my own. I'm not a lawyer, despite the qualifications on this background over here behind me. But in terms of qualifications, I guess that could kick us off. So I went to UCT to do a BA in English, literature, and drama initially. And it was through my BA at UCT that I discovered that they had this program called screen production. And essentially what screen production is, it's an accelerator film program within a BA. And so it's not your typical film school like AFTER, where you go in and for a 4-year period, you get trained from the ground up. It's sort of like a SparkNotes edition. There's 3 semesters, and within those 3 semesters, at the end of it, you produce a thesis film. So I did get some technical film training through that process, but it definitely wasn't as rigorous as like an AFTER, for example. And then after I graduated from UCT, it was a 3-year degree. I wanted to get as far away from academia as possible. And I wanted to earn money. And so I went into the commercials industry working as a PA and a production coordinator in the service industry. And I did that for 2 years, burnt out basically, and decided that I wanted to go back to do an honors at UCT. So I went back to do my honors at UCT in documentary film. Along the way, during that 2-year period of being out of UCT, I was also continuing making my own work and my own projects and my films, which had been traveling to international film festivals. And so I was able to use that as a portfolio to get into my honors program at UCT. And once I completed my honors at UCT, I applied for a very well-known and prestigious master's program at Stanford in documentary film that I was absolutely certain at the time I would not get into. In fact, even my parents bet me that I would not get into the program. Like, we were all equally shocked. I mean, my parents love me and they're very proud, but they were like, we're very shocked. So I was very fortunate to get into this program at Stanford in California. And I went off to do an MFA, a Master's of Fine Arts in documentary at Stanford for 2 years, during which the pandemic happened. And during that program, I went on to produce and direct 3 documentaries, 2 of which are currently online as Vimeo staff picks. The one is called Wavelengths and the other one is called The Gallery That Destroys All Shame. And then I did my thesis film, which I was very fortunate to actually shoot in South Africa. Because of COVID, I ended up back in South Africa, basically finishing my MFA remotely. And that film, my thesis film, was titled Drummies, which went on to get acquired by Condé Nast and The New Yorker, and it now exists online. So often I'd experienced that, like with documentary filmmaking, as beautiful as it can be, often the actual products are quite difficult to access. They're almost inaccessible, which often defeats the purpose of documentary filmmaking in the first place. And so I was very fortunate with both of these 3 films that they live online for anyone to see, open access for free. And so for me as a documentary filmmaker, that's really been incredibly just a really great experience to have and to be able to share it with as many people as possible. So that's my summary of my life story. I don't know if there's any, I mean, there are tons of gaps to fill if you want, but Taryn, I'm assuming that that's all you want for now.
Thank you. That's great. And we welcome questions later on. Thank you.
Sure. Taryn, would you like me to start off or would you like me to say anything else?
You're welcome to jump in. Thank you.
To jump in. Okay, cool. So basically, this masterclass is a case study using my latest short documentary, which is a film called Faces of Fortune. It's a 22 documentary about one of South Africa's most famous and perhaps first ever drag queens. He actually refers to himself as a female impersonator. That's a technical term that he differentiates within the film. But I'd actually known the protagonist of this film for many years. It just actually so happens that I'd been developing a feature-length film in which this character was one of the main characters of an ensemble. And for various reasons, that project unfortunately didn't come into fruition. But because of that, I'd actually been filming with Terry since the end of 2015. So I have footage of him dating back to 2015, 2016, and 2017. I'd also known Terry in a personal capacity. My mom's a theatre journalist and he is in the theatre world. And so I'd almost like grown up with him. So he was a very personal person within my life, both professionally as a bit of a mentor, but then also personally. And I developed this big film a couple of years back with Terry and a bunch of other people. And unfortunately, as this often happens with documentaries, things fell through and the project wasn't able to come into fruition. But I knew that the footage that I'd shot with Terry was gold, always. Like, as soon as we started filming with Terry and I started spending time with him, I just knew instinctively that his story was so incredible and so important to document that it needed to be documented. And B, that he was also just an incredible person and personality to capture on camera. And so when the project fell through, I put all of the footage and all my notes and drafts and everything in my little hidden for later folder. I have a lot of different folders on my computer. I have my rejection folders, which are very big. I mean, rejection is part of the industry. And then I have my to return folders on projects that don't necessarily come through, in a certain time. And then I hope to revisit it another time, basically. And so I returned to South Africa after I graduated with my master's. And one of my friends actually pointed out that the NFVF had this call for funding that they put out for Community Unsung Heroes, basically a slate of films where they were trying to highlight various different community figures whose stories hadn't been told. And they were basically seeking filmmakers within different parts of South Africa to represent all the different regions to tell these different stories. And they were looking for applications. And I hadn't really seen the application beforehand. I basically saw this come through, and then I saw that there was like, I think it was a week in total until the due date for the application, was coming up. And so at first I was like, there's no way that I can apply for this thing. I don't have enough time. Like, you know how it goes with applications and proposal, often it takes a very long time to develop something. And then I sat and I thought about this, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this slate was made for Terry. If there is one person that I've known literally since 2015 that I've been wanting to make a film with, it's Terry, and he literally fits this criteria perfectly. So long story short, I reached out to Terry. I'm like, hey, we have a week to put this proposal together. Are you interested? He was like, yes, let's do it. So I sat and did not sleep for a week. And luckily for me, because I'd filmed previously before with Terry, I had my own personal archive of him. And I also knew him so well that it was a relatively easy proposal writing experience. It wasn't like writing something from scratch. And so that is definitely something like a caveat to state up front, because every single project is so different. Like I'm currently developing a different project right now where I have no pre-existing relationship with the main character and the subject. And so that is requiring a lot of research. And I would never be able to have done something like this with, this new project. But with Terry, because he was almost like a father figure to me and I'd known him so well, and I could quite literally write his life story from the beginning to the end, like with my eyes closed at that point. But I still didn't think that I really had a chance, but, we submitted it anyway in hope. And we're very fortunate that we received funding for it. We were part of the slate, one of 10 projects selected. And this by far has been the most sort of like robust project from a creative scale and also from a budget scale that I've ever done on my own. So just with regards to budgeting and short films, like in this country, it's very difficult to find money for documentaries, full stop, period, even if it's a feature film. For short films, it's even more difficult. But with the slate, because it was sponsored in part by the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, the budget was a bit more. And so the total budgets that they were allowing per project was, I think that they've now gone up to 500, but at the time it was 470,000 Rand. So for a short film, especially in South Africa, that's a lot of money. And so from the beginning, when I saw that this was the grant allocation, I knew that this was a really fantastic opportunity to make the film that I'd always envisioned making, with all the resources that I wanted to have to make the film. And so it was a real dream come true in that sense. But of course, with more money comes more responsibility, more stresses, different aspects of it. It's much easier when you're just going around by yourself with one camera. You're not relying on a crew. You're not relying on post-production flows. When there's a bigger budget involved, it becomes a whole other beast. So that being said, I think I should maybe show you some of the proposal details that I started off with in terms of my application, just so that you can all see. Also, I know that like there are questions that are going to be coming towards the end, like in a sort of classical sense. But if anyone is unclear about something that I'm saying, please feel free to like raise your hand, because I wouldn't want anything to be unclear as I'm going along. You know what I'm going to do first is, before I show you the budget and the proposal, because what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to take you through sort of what the project looked like in its proposal form, which, bear in mind, came together in like a week. So not the most clean of proposals that I've ever done in my life. But luckily the NFVF and docSHARE saw the potential in the story. And then I'm going to show you the final product, well, at least parts of the final product, because I don't think that there's going to be time to show extended clips from it, but I'm going to do my best. But what I do want to show you, and this is more from a creative angle than a budget angle, but actually it's a little bit of both. I'm going to show you now, I'm going to start off with 2 clips from footage that I shot by myself with a 5D in 2017 with Terry, just by myself. This was when we were still developing this big feature film, and he was one of the key characters in this big project. And then after these 2 clips, I'm going to show you the opening of the final film that I made with this funding from the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture and the NFVF, just to show you the contrast in terms of A, like the creative scale of it all, and B, I guess the budget, and then also just the creative cohesiveness of the whole thing. So I'm going to share my screen, and if for some reason it lags, I can send you all a link to the clip too. But let's start off with, can you all see what I'm showing? Maybe someone just yell yes or no.
We can see it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so the first 2 clips are what I shot with Terry by myself in 2017, when there was no money attached to the project. We're just trying to figure out what the film was about, and then there'll be a few spaces of black, and then you'll see the opening for the final film. Let's try and play it.
Funny enough, they must have come through here again. I thought that they only do it once.
Who are you messaging?
No, I'm not messaging, I'm checking my messages. It's cold and rainy, so I don't want them to get wet. And people always say, yeah, but they're only dogs, and I keep on reminding them, they might only be dogs, but they're my dogs, number 1. Number 2, I asked them. When they came here, do they want to live with me? And if this is my house, and this is my room, why can't my dogs be kept warm? I do have total empathy for persons who are not as spoilt as my doggies, but that's life.
Okay, so just before I start the opening of the film, what that also shows is, even though it's very low quality, low budget, it does show you the sense of familiarity and proximity that I had to him from the beginning, which of course grew as we developed the film and we spent more time together. But I think that that's very important, because I don't think I would have been able to have made the film that I'm about to show you had I not done all of that pre-existing developmental filming with him beforehand.
You know, people often ask me, was it that I had a feeling inside of actually being a female? With coming to terms with my feminine side? When I was a kid, when no one was around, did I walk around in my mother's high-heeled shoes? No, it was none of that crap, man. It was a job.
Okay, great. And then I'm just going to play one more clip just to give you a sense after that of like sort of the world that the film steps into.
Faces of Fortune, Scene 1, Take 1. You know, everyone wants to know who is the real Terry Fortune. Shall I do it again? You know, everyone wants to know who the real Terry Fortune is.
Making a grand entrance, the lovely Miss Terry Fortune.
I was possibly one of the first female impersonators in South Africa.
Good evening. Bonsoir. Guten Abend. Who's at my brew?
Okay, great. So in terms of sort of just the jump, I think that's really important to note. If we just go back to that first clip, you see the sort of very rough aesthetic that I had with Terry when I was filming originally with him versus very high production value over here when it came to the final film, which was because I was able to do that because of money, yes, but I was also able to do that because I'd spent so much time with this project in my head, creatively conceptualizing it, that, you know, I often think that sometimes creative projects come into fruition at the time when they're meant to come into fruition. It's sort of like, you know, like a baby. It comes out when it's ready to come out. And I think that, especially with this project, I think that had I made this documentary on Terry, say in 2016, I don't think it would have been as strong. And that's not just because of money reasons, it's also because of creative conceptualization and just time spent with the person in order to get to the final product that we both wanted it to be, because this project was very much a creative collaboration between Terry and myself. Terry was actually an executive producer on this film too. And so he was very involved throughout the process. I think what I'd like to show you is, I mean, seeing as the title of this seminar is something along like "Show me the money, honey," something like that. I'll show you, this is the budget that I used to apply for funding for the film. So over here, you see the amount, 470. Just by the way, all of this is available online in the NFVF. If anyone ever has any questions as to like how much publicly funded films, like how much money they get or like what their budgets are, you can literally go and see it on the NFVF. Like they have a mandate to make everything publicly available. So if you ever have questions, that's an open resource for you to go and like search through. I think this really taught me a lot about budgeting in terms of every project that I do always teaches me about how wrong I originally was. And with this project, the glaring thing that it really taught me about was this section over here, which I am going to find for you. Where is it now? Music transcriptions. Here we go. So for any experienced producer who's watching this, you're probably laughing out loud right now. And I don't blame you, because archive and music rights in particular is an extremely expensive aspect of production. And I produced this by myself, basically. And so I had a couple of people who I called up beforehand and like asked for advice, but I really had no idea when it came to actual archive costs, what this was going to cost me and how to budget correctly for it. So in the end, and I'll show you some archival sequences so that you can see sort of for you know, how much archive actually went into this. But in the end, I think archive ended up costing closer to around 90,000 Rand. So more than double what I'd put down in the budget. And so that was you know, honestly, I think some people may have said to you, would have said to you, maybe you could have gotten away with like less money. But there were two things that I was looking for in terms of the archive for this project. Number one was Apartheid archive, or like archive from Apartheid, which is notoriously very, very difficult to get, everyone knows, and very expensive. So there was a crisis with archive for that. And then there was also this story that Terry tells about Mozambique, which I'll show you now. And a big part of the creative treatment of this film was this idea where Terry's sitting down in an interview format and he's retelling his story. And as he's retelling his story, there are reenactments on stage as he's, narrating his journey. And then also archival moments to just give the audience a sort of glimpse into the world that he's reimagining for himself as he's retelling his story. And so there were two non-negotiable parts of the film that I knew I needed archive for. The rest, I was able to enactments with an actor. So that was great. And I mean, the archive costs would have been like 5 times as much had I not done that. But let me very briefly show you 2 of the archival sequences so that you can get a sense of how much went into it. And I ended up doing it all myself. Like, I know some people will say like, oh, you should get like an archive producer and stuff like that. And I think you research as best as you can and reach out to people. I think it's I do think it's a fairly straightforward process. And I think it is possible to do by yourself. And most importantly, much cheaper. So I would always say, try to do things yourself, because you'll be able to, instead of paying someone else to do it, you'll be able to like pay for extra footage, which costs per second, quite literally. I mean, and it's usually in pounds. So it's a bit of a headache. But let me show you one of the sequences with the archive, just to illustrate. Which one is it? This is the Mozambique.
I traveled.
So this is a great example of like trying to find sort of creative solves for a lack of budget, or not as much budget as you would want in an ideal world. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd all love millions of rands to make our films, but that's not going to happen. And so the creative treatment from the beginning for this film was always that I was going to have an actor playing a younger version of Terry, as sort of like a younger version of himself, which was both a creative strategy, but it was also a budget strategy. And so this over here, this person he's an actor and his name is Anzio, and he plays a younger version of Terry in the film while Terry is narrating his stories. And so here's a short sequence that involves a bit of Anzio and then some archive.
My father was very dominant. He did all the shopping. He would buy 2 pairs of stockings, one for my mother and one for me. I stopped using condoms with water in it when one day a little hole appeared in the condom. Then I only had one boob and the other ones was completely flat. By the time I've done the makeup, the wig, the costume, the heels, I would look at myself, stare at myself in the mirror and tell myself, you are now Terry Fortune, the woman.
So that's just one part of the reenactment stuff. And then there's this whole self-reflexive breaking of the fourth wall aspect that is part of the film. And it was, in fact, it was part of the proposal, but it was really developed once after we got the grant, in collaboration with my mentor, Simon Wood, which I can go through a little bit with you afterwards, but I'll just show you just so that you get an understanding of the sort of breaking self-reflexivity and breaking of the fourth wall over here.
Yeah. Let's see with the green one. Like I said, green doesn't really work too well on our skin. But of course, experimentation could always enhance it. Who knows?
So what do you want me to do? Do you want me to take the eyebrow, or do you want me to do like a winged?
That's right. Take it like with the eyes. Take it up.
Terry, is this what you had in mind for when you were growing up?
Yes. You mean yes. Correct. That would be exactly the set if I was. I would have, maybe the mirror wouldn't be as big as this. I would have a mirror maybe half that size. Yeah. Yeah. Looks stunning on you. Look much better on you than it looks on me.
No, I'm not sure about that.
Terry Fortune never had to go through any emotions because she didn't, all she had to do was react to the emotions that Tyrone installed in her. That's it. So that kind of move, like that, like you're showing off, that kind of lift it. So lift it. Not that so not high, but that you have like a sassy feel. That's it. She only existed when people said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands or welcome on stage Terry Fortune."
So now the one part of the archival process is coming up now.
There were so many challenges politically that people were going through. When they came for a night of entertainment, they wanted to be able to say, entertain me. Let me get lost in the moment. Because when I walk out, I will need to deal again with the realities of our situation. I worked in Swaziland.
Anyway, so this little part is interesting because I did a lot of research around archive in terms of South Africa during apartheid, and I was just quite frankly unable to afford that archive on top of this other archive that I wanted to use. And so my creative solution for that, which I'm glad actually I ended up doing, because I think that it actually made this part of the film more interesting. You know, there's that saying in documentaries that limitations often yield more creativity, or it like generates more creativity. And so I definitely think that like rule sort of applies to this part. And so I was basically able to negotiate with a widow of a well-known photographer, South African photographer, to use his photographs, which I then went and animated basically in post to try and give them a sort of slightly alive feel in this process. And even though it wasn't exactly, you know, originally I wanted like specific video archive from this time, I think having these still photographs in a way lent it a certain like sort of theatrical component that really fit in well when it came to this dreamlike escape going from the stage here as he's narrating his story up into these images, especially with all the people sitting here. Like I imagine that it would be like a cross dissolve with the people sitting in the chairs with the people at the march over here. And so in that situation, it worked out for the best. And then I'm going to show you one more little clip from another archival moment. So this was the archive that cost me a lot of money. This was the Mozambique footage. Let me just check if this is the right one. Yeah. Okay. Also, Taryn, yell if I'm going over time. Can I play this 1.5 minute clip?
You're good. Thank you.
Am I good? Okay. So yeah, this was what ate up my entire budget. You can tell me whether you think it was worth it or not.
I traveled. I wanted to get out of the country and the confines of apartheid. No one had a cell phone. Nobody would know who Terry was. I went to all the countries which would allow South African passports: Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana, Mozambique. Mozambique independence was coming up. The government had asked that each club send someone to be part of the show, and I walked on stage and did my whole drag number. And at that last few seconds when I toyed with taking my wig off, I thought, stop. A man in a dress is going to cause a riot. I wonder if in Mozambique they ever realized that part of their celebration of their independence was a man in drag.
Okay, great. So now what I want to show you, I guess, because this is about taking you step by step. Sorry if my laptop is screaming and humming in the background. I think it's because it's struggling a little bit. So you saw some clips from the film now, and I think what's really interesting to me is how similar the film ended up being to the very original proposal. It did change quite a bit. In fact, the main part of the transformation of the film on a creative note really was like the self-reflexive component. So my original proposal, it was a lot more sort of standard and classical, straight to camera, talking heads type of documentary. So this is what I applied to the NFVF with. This was my treatment that I scrambled together to get done in like a week. This footage over here was from stuff that I'd shot with Terry on my own in 2016 and 2017. So yeah, I was very fortunate that I had this material to work with when I was putting my proposal together. But this was the log line that I wrote in my original proposal, and essentially the log line remained the same. I mean, it was pretty unchanged, and that has less to do with like creative stubbornness and more to do with the fact that from the beginning I sort of had a pretty clear understanding of what the film needed to be, and Terry and I had spent so much time in development together that we both were on the same page. And so we were very fortunate that it didn't change too drastically over the process of making it. And this, of course, is some of Terry's personal archive. This is him from the 70s. And I mean, I'll just quickly go through some of the treatment part. So whenever I put together a proposal, I always put together a visual document with the treatment. And so even if I didn't have these images of Terry, I would have subbed them out for like internet sourced images that spoke to the copy, in other words, the writing that I was putting in, because I do think that people are like, all adults on funding panels are like children. They need visual aids in order to see what it is that you're trying to explain, because film at the end of the day is a visual medium. And so it makes sense that they would need something visual to help illustrate what, you know, you're trying to like communicate to them in written form. And then also just on like another practical note, like you have someone on a panel who's sifting through hundreds, if not thousands of applications. By the time your application like lands on their desk, odds are they're probably exhausted, tired, do not feel like reading yet another proposal. And so you have to try and make sure that you can like grab their attention in any way. And so I always just think that images and pictures are a great way of doing that. And so that's always my approach to writing proposals. I always create a keynote, but you can use PowerPoint, you can do whatever. It doesn't need to be fancy. So yeah, this is what I applied to with NFVF. Again, you saw that clip in the very beginning with Terry in his bedroom in Walmer Estate. And then let me just, sorry, I know that we're running out of time already. So that was the treatment that I applied. Oh, sorry, someone has their hand up. Taryn, would you like me to continue, or do you want me to take a hand?
If you just want to finish your thoughts, and then we can go into Matlala Pule's question. Thank you.
Sure. So let me just show you what's interesting, I guess, from a process perspective. Is this was the treatment that, okay, sorry. Let me show you application. So this was the treatment that I want to get rid of this. This was the treatment that I applied to the NFVF with, right? So here we see it, goes from here to the end. And then how it works with the NFVF is once you get funding, you can't just go ahead and get all the money and then just go and make the film. You have to send through treatments and scripts and deliverables before you go into production to ensure that you're on the same page with them. And that's not like a creative control thing. That's because they're trying to help you in your process. They've got so many people who are extremely qualified creatively to advise you on the process. And so all of those sort of deliverables are all for your own benefit. And I'm really glad that I had those deliverables, because as a result, I ended up with a much more refined, interesting creative approach to my film than I think what I went into the process with when I proposed it in the first place. So this was proposal number 1 when I sent it in. And then this, no, not that. Let's try and find it. Here we go. This was the final proposal. So as you can see, there's a bit of a change. Already starting off, there's more of a focus on this concept and this aesthetic of the stage, which, as you saw in the final film, is a big part of the creative motif of the film, because there are various reenactments that occur on stage that a younger version of himself reenacts. And so, again, this synopsis, even though it's slightly different to the very first synopsis, it's pretty similar. It hasn't changed that much. Again, you see the same image. So again, you see the split persona. So the main thing really over here was that I was grabbing from different resources in terms of inspiration for aesthetic approach and style. And that was really, really important and informative, because that's what informed the whole Interrotron approach that we did. So you have these like direct to camera interviews, and that was actually a technique that Errol Morris developed. And Errol Morris is a director. He did The Thin Blue Line amongst many other films, and he sort of like created the aesthetic of it. And so I pulled from many different resources and films that sort of use that approach to put into my treatment, so that the NFVF could see what it is that I was trying to actually do with the final product. And so, yeah, stage production, there we go. There's Anzi over there as the cast. There's the verite aspect that's still in the film, cinematography, lighting, tone, music. So in the costumes, so it's, I think everyone will have a different approach to sort of like this treatment phase. But I think for me, because so much of it was almost like a theater production, it was very important that I broke down every single section very clearly when I was submitting my final treatment, so that they understood exactly what it is that I wanted to do, because ultimately they were then going to be able to like help advise me much better in terms of what I should and shouldn't do, or rethink, or whatever. Taryn, should I stop there, or should I keep going, or?
Let's jump into questions. So,
sure.
Matla,
can I stop sharing for now? I'm going to stop my share. Okay.
Matla Pule, you are welcome to ask your first question.
Okay, thanks everybody. Hi, Jessie.
Hi.
I have a question. I'll try to keep them short and go straight to the.
Oh, I'm struggling to hear you.
Moklala Pule, I've just put you on mute if you wouldn't mind typing your question because the sound is bad. I'm sorry about that. So I think let's go to the typed questions. We have
Eric, the glow up is real. That is true, Eric. That is
great
true.
comments.
That's what we
so
all try and strive for.
We've got a question from Cheryl. Oh wait, sorry. Let me go down. Tumelo. Tumelo says, good job, Jessie. I'd like to park some questions here as they come. With your application, did you apply only in your personal capacity or did you use your/a company as part of your application to secure the funding?
So yeah, with these particular projects for the Unsung Community Heroes, you can't apply as an individual. You have to apply with a PTY Limited, basically a company that's registered. And so I have my own company, and so I was able to apply through my own company. But my suggestion to anyone who's thinking about, say, applying for the next round, if you don't have a company, is to just find a really good producer who has a company that you can attach yourself to, who's interested in your film, and then you can apply through that company. I always would err on the side of caution because I think that it's very important to maintain a sense of ownership and like creative ownership over your idea. So like going the route of having your own company is always best, just because you own the IP through your company. But if you aren't able to do that, because I know that sometimes it's just not financially possible, or like from a process perspective, not possible to, create a company out of nowhere. There are tons of people who I'm sure would be very interested, especially through the DFA network, of joining and partnering with young filmmakers who have really interesting, superb stories to tell through the slate. But yeah, with the slate films, you have to have a company. You can apply as an individual for I think when it comes to development funding for certain things, but I think that there's a cap, and I'm not certain what that cap is anymore. It may be 150,000 Rand or 200, but with regards to these short films, we're talking about 470,000 Rand plus films. So you do have to have a company to put that through.
Hi,
Thank
Jessie.
you.
Can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
I can. I don't know where the
Okay.
voice is coming from, but I hear a voice.
It's Tumelo. Thank you for the response. I wanted to figure out, because the thing is, if you're doing development funding, they still ask you for a tax pin and things that are attached to an actual company. So when you're doing it I was helping a student apply for development funding, but then now the issue is they needed a company tax pin. They couldn't do it without certain things that are attached to a company. So with that regard, how would you then do it? Is it a matter of, because I doubt using a personal tax number is going to be valid for an application of that nature?
No,
I think it really just depends on what it is that you're applying for, and how much money it is. But they do stipulate you can apply as an individual for certain things, I think, unless I'm completely mistaken and it's changed, in which case.
Well, can I jump in? Shall I jump in quickly, Jessie? It's Lauren.
Yeah.
I applied for this NFVF development funding for an idea. So I do know that they did want a company involved. And yes, you did need to submit it with a tax clearance certificate /PIN. That was absolutely necessary. I wanted to just make you guys aware, if you don't know, that you can buy shelf companies very easily. So you just need a good tax accountant, somebody who's connected to that world of setting up tax and setting up companies. And yes, you can go ahead and register your own company name in due course. But if you're in a pinch, a lot of SPVs buy shelf companies that already exist. Okay. And that's a fast way to get into the system. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I just
I
thought
know
that
that
might
when
be
it comes
helpful.
to the PESP for the other creative arts sector, like they just rolled out the new guidelines, you can apply for certain funding there as an individual without a company attached.
Where's
So as I
where's
said,
that?
I think just check whatever it is that you're applying for.
Case by
And
case.
also, just to be clear, and also like people are responsive if you send emails. The NFVF, docSHARE, all these
Okay.
people, if you have any questions, I always, when in doubt, I always just ask. So
Okay, thank you, Jessie. And one last question from me, and I need you to be as honest as possible. How instrumental do you think your qualification level was in securing your funding?
gosh, I don't know. I wish I was a mind reader. I actually don't wish I was a mind reader. I don't want to. I have no idea, to be honest with you. I think it has more. I think it has more to do with the films that I made while I was doing my master's and how well they did than the qualification itself. So 2 of those films went on to travel and win many awards at international film festivals, including Vision de Real, the Brooklyn Film Festival, Big Sky, all of these other, Oscar qualifying festivals. And then 2 of them ended up being Vimeo staff picks, which is like a big thing. And then my last thesis film ended up getting acquired by The New Yorker. And so I really think it was more of a CV thing, like in terms of the actual work on my CV than like the document of my degree. But I don't know, because I'm not a mind reader. I would hope that it would be more because of the work than the degree. Because I think it's always about the work. The work speaks for itself, you know.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you. But just to answer your question, like you don't need a master's from an American school to make.
No, my thing is, okay, here's the thing. I think it's about impression, right? Regardless of what it is. Because with your regard, it's not about academics per se, it's also about what you did practically. So the stuff you actually did spoke volumes for you. So I was just checking from your experience how it was and what you think.
Yeah, exactly. No, you've nailed it on the head. It's all about what it is that you do, for sure.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in here because we've got a lot of really eager attendees who want to ask questions. But just to very briefly pick up on this point, I think, Jessie, you touched on this about the importance of treatments and your visual concept, and really how evaluators in a panel are going to receive what's on the page. So while they might look at previous work, if you provide links, think about how much work and effort that's going to take sometimes to, as you say, a tired panel. It's about those first impressions, I think. So I think you want to really produce something as glossy, as informative, and articulate as possible. And it's really interesting to see the contrast between your 2 treatments once you really understood your subject and could bring a panel into that world and what you wanted to realize. Let's look at your question. So you've asked, how close to the filming/editing timelines did you stick? Not a lot of shoot days and only 6 weeks to edit. With so much archive and the tons of footage you filmed, it must have been a lot of work in post. Thank you for the great question.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. It was the biggest project that I've ever done, and it was a lot. I ended up collaborating with an excellent editor named Jacques de Villiers, who's worked a lot with Jenna Bass on a couple of her films. If you've heard of Jenna, she works mostly in the fiction world. And I chose Jacques because Jacques had actually been a former lecturer of mine, and I'd worked with him previously on a couple of projects, but I knew that for a film like this, I needed an eye that was well-versed in narrative and scripted content because of the different narrative and scripted elements that I was incorporating into the film. And so Jacques and I had a very close collaboration. Essentially, I edited it with him, because I do have an editing background. I've edited all of my films up until this one, like entirely on my own. And so for the sake of time and scheduling, there was, if we'd had maybe like 5 months to edit it, I wouldn't have had to have stepped in to a co-editing role. But ultimately that is what ended up happening. And Jacques and I would basically pass cuts back and forth and different sequences back and forth, and then come together in order to make it work quicker.
Thank you so much. Let's just ask 2 final questions. We've got 2 minutes left. From Charlene, she says, thanks for this, Jessie. What would happen to a docu like this once it's produced? Can you offer it to any broadcasters / streaming service / online platform? Does the NFVF help with this? We've also got a question from Matlala Pule, who was originally asking a question, but we had audio difficulties. How much work do you put into produce reenactments? When do you prepare the script? Secondly, I see your work is journalism inspired. How much of your mom's influence do you allow to be visible in your work? Actually, how much external influence do you allow in your film?
Okay, there's a lot of questions. I'll try and start from the first one. Was the first one about, what was the first one about?
What happens to a documentary like this once it's
produced? Right, with broadcasters, yes. So the answer is yes. The NFVF does help when it comes to broadcasting, especially DSAC, the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, because they were the official funders of this project, the Slate. And they're still working on broadcasting deals right now as we speak, because we just finished the Slate a few months ago. But ultimately, your film is your film. You own the IP to it. And so if you want to go and sell it to a broadcaster independently, that is within your right to do so. I hope that answers the question. Oh, wait, now the next ones. Okay. It was, oh, here, I can see on the side. How much do you put in to produce? Okay. So for the reenactments, it was actually quite simple. The way that I approached it was that before we shot anything on stage, any reenactments, anything with the actor, I sat down with Terry and we filmed an interview for 9.5 hours at his house. And that interview is what forms the basis of the narrative. And so I spaced it out with a week in between shooting the interview and shooting the theatre stuff at the Artscape. So I went through that interview footage so that all of those moments that we reenacted came from his actual like audio that he said during his interview. And so it wasn't even scripted really. It was all based on things that he'd said before during the interview. I just ensured that we would do the interview before actually doing the reenactments. Journalism inspired, yes and no. Sometimes it is more journalistic, sometimes it is less. For example, this film is actually not all that journalistically inspired. It's more of like sort of like a creative approach. Whereas my other films, especially the ones that I did in America, which for example, was focused on reproductive health, I would say that that was more journalistically inspired. But I mean, my mom's influenced me an incredible amount. I mean, she would take me to like theatre shows when I was like 5 and 6. I mean, I grew up at the Baxter, like quite literally grew up in the theatre world in South Africa with people like Terry. And so of course it influences my work in a big way. And I went to UCT originally to study theatre. And so theatre is a big part of my work and part of my process for sure. And how much do I allow external influences? Can you maybe elaborate what you mean by external influences? Do you mean like other work or other artists or other filmmakers or Terry himself? What do you mean by that?
If we don't have a response, I think we can wrap up now. I'm sorry, Margot.
It says here, other artists or filmmakers. So I take great inspiration from other films and filmmakers. So for example, there's this film called Casting John Benet. I don't know if anyone's like heard of it or knows of it, but that was a huge influence for me aesthetically for this project. And so That was very, very, very big. But then, of course, there's a line between like imitating versus taking inspiration. And so that's always a very careful line to toe. In terms of filmmakers, I always listen to other filmmakers. Like I have a very close creative relationship with Simon Wood, who is like one of my original mentors. Like he was the one who actually made me apply for that master's program at Stanford in the first place. And we have a very similar approach to sort of ideas surrounding aesthetic and form when it comes to film. And so I always sit down with him, and he usually sits me down and is usually like, Jessie, this is shit. You need to rethink everything that you've thought. And then I like have an argument with him about it, and then we come to a middle conclusion. And so I'm always asking people for opinions. I'm always asking for feedback. It's part of the process. Between influence and copycatting. Well, I think it's pretty clear when you copycat other people's work, because it's a copy and paste situation. I think if you're trying to remain true to the subject and you're trying to draw form from the story itself, so like for example with Terry, it was organic that we would end up doing these reenactments on stage because he is a storyteller and a theater maker himself. That is his world. And so all of these creative ideas, I looked at other aesthetic references, but ultimately they all came from the source, which is the story, which is the person. And so that's very important, I think. I think it always shows in that way. I've got a direct message from someone. Should I read it out loud, Taryn?
Sure. And then this will be our last question. And Pascal's asked, I think it's important, where can we watch the full film?
Oh, okay. The full film, still pending the premiere of that, hopefully soon. And we shot on a Sony FX6 with vintage Nikon lenses and Pro Mist filters. And I shot with a cinematographer that I collaborate regularly with. He shot drummies too, called Gray Kotze. He also has a YouTube channel called The In-Depth Cine, where he does explainer videos and sort of like breaks down various different films and stuff like that. Love the Sony, big fan.
Okay, so I think on that note, we're going to close. Jessie, thank you so much for such a personal, illustrative and practical talk. And all the clips were beautiful and very useful. We really appreciate all your insights. And please tune in for our next docSHARE webinar on Thursday, the 2nd of March with Lauren Groenewold on proposal writing. Thank you and see you next time.